My son-in-law handed me a printed sheet the first time I showed up to babysit my granddaughter. I'd driven 40 minutes from Beaumont to their house in Sugar Land, Texas, with a box of her favorite animal crackers and a picture book about fireflies I'd found at a used bookstore off the highway. My daughter answered the door. She had that look on her face, the one where she's smiling but her eyes are doing something else entirely. And her husband, standing just behind her left shoulder, handed me a single piece of paper like he was presenting a contract. I read it standing on their front porch. Visits on Saturdays only, between 10 and noon. No bringing outside food. No discussing anything about their finances with my daughter. No taking Lily anywhere without 48 hours written notice. No posting photos of Lily on social media under any circumstances. And at the bottom a line that said, "By entering this home, you agree to these terms." I looked up. My daughter was studying the porch railing. I folded the paper in half and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I smiled and said it was good to see them both, because what else do you say? My name is Arthur Conley. I'm 58 years old. I spent 27 years working as a high school shop teacher in Beaumont, Texas, and I coached JV baseball on the side for most of that time. I retired 3 years ago when my wife, Carol, got her diagnosis. Ovarian cancer, stage 3. We had 14 months from the first appointment to the last one. She was the kind of woman who kept a running list of everyone's birthdays on a post-it note inside the kitchen cabinet, who could name every kid I'd ever coached, and usually their parents too, who once organized an entire neighborhood block party in 4 days because she decided it would be good for people. She met Lily once. One time, Lily was 6 weeks old and Carol was already in her second round of chemo, and she sat in the hospital recliner with Lily against her chest for about 20 minutes, and she cried the whole time, but she was smiling too, and she told me afterward that she wasn't afraid anymore, that she'd seen enough. Carol passed 2 years ago this April. After she was gone, I did what I could to stay present without being in the way. I called ahead before every visit. I kept it to once a week, Saturday mornings, which is what they'd asked. I brought Lily small things, a little stuffed armadillo, a set of watercolor pencils, a bird guide for kids, because she'd started asking me about the birds at my feeder when I'd show her pictures on my phone. She had Carol's way of paying attention, this focused, quiet interest in small things that most people walk past without noticing. But something shifted about every 3 or 4 months. The window got shorter. Then I was asked not to park in their driveway because they needed it for their cars. Then the animal crackers became a problem because Lily was apparently following a new diet plan they hadn't told me about. Then one Saturday I showed up on time, and my son-in-law said it wasn't a good day. Lily was tired, and I turned around and drove 40 minutes home. I mentioned it to my daughter the next time we spoke. She said he just liked things to run smoothly. She said I knew how he was. I did know how he was. What I was starting to understand was that she had stopped being able to tell the difference between what he wanted and what she actually thought. The document arrived in my email about 7 months after Carol passed. It wasn't a casual note. It was a formatted PDF with their names at the top and mine below, laid out like a lease agreement. My son-in-law had apparently put it together himself, or had someone help him, because it used language I wouldn't have expected from a guy who sells commercial real estate and watches football all weekend. Visiting hours, Saturdays, 10 to 12, duration, maximum 2 hours. Gifts require advance approval via text. No photographs shared publicly. No discussion of household finances. No overnight visits without 30 days advance notice in writing. No contact with Lily by phone without prior coordination. And at the bottom a signature line with my name already typed beneath it. I didn't sign it. I called my daughter and asked if we could get coffee, just the two of us. She said she'd have to check. She checked. She said she couldn't that week. I asked about the following week. She said she'd try. 3 weeks later, she called me back. She sounded careful, the way you sound when someone is listening. She said that her husband felt like the current arrangement wasn't sustainable, that he thought it would be better for Lily if there was more structure around visits. And then she said, and I could hear her reading from something I could hear the paper, that if I wanted to maintain regular contact with Lily, he thought it was reasonable for me to contribute to Lily's care expenses, a monthly amount, to help with activities, education costs, enrichment programs. She paused. I waited. $850 a month, transferred to a household account he managed. She said he called it a family participation contribution. I was sitting in my kitchen. The same kitchen where Carol and I used to drink our coffee at 6 in the morning before the house woke up, where she kept her post-it note of birthdays inside the cabinet door, where I still hadn't moved her reading glasses from the windowsill because I kept forgetting, and then, when I'd remember, I'd decide not to. I told my daughter I needed some time to think about it. She said that was fine. She said she thought it was a reasonable thing. She said it like she was trying to convince both of us. I didn't sleep well that night. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about Lily showing me a roly-poly bug she'd found in my backyard, turning it over in her palm with this look of absolute scientific seriousness. I thought about Carol holding her in that hospital recliner. I thought about $60,000. I should explain that. When my daughter and her husband bought their house in Sugar Land 4 years ago, I gave them $60,000. It was the bulk of what I had saved from a small inheritance my own father had left me when he passed, combined with money Carol and I had put aside specifically to help our kids get started. We didn't have conditions. We didn't ask for anything back. They were family, and it was family money. I signed a gift letter because their mortgage lender required it, which meant there was a paper trail showing clearly that it was a gift, not a loan. What I didn't know at the time was how my son-in-law thought about that money. I had a neighbor 2 doors down, a retired woman named Bev, whose daughter had gone through a bad divorce a few years back. Bev had mentioned once in passing that she'd found a good family law attorney in Beaumont, patient, thorough, not someone who turned everything into a fight. His name was Thomas Greer. I'd put his card in my junk drawer and forgotten about it. I took it out that night. I called Thomas Greer the next morning. His assistant put me through within the hour. I spent 40 minutes on the phone explaining everything as clearly as I could. The document, the demands, the money, the restricted visits. Thomas listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. He said, "Mr. Conley, before we talk again, I want you to do a few things. Save every email, every text, every PDF he sent you. Write down every visit that was shortened, canceled, or denied, with dates and times. And I want you to have a conversation with whoever prepared your gift letter for that $60,000. I asked him why. He said, because in Texas, documented gifts to a married couple have certain legal characteristics, and I want to understand exactly what documentation exists, and whether the way those funds were subsequently used is relevant to your situation. I had used the same CPA for 12 years. His name was Douglas Park, and he worked out of a small office on Calder Avenue in Beaumont and kept files the way serious people keep files, organized, dated, cross-referenced, permanent. He'd prepared the gift letter. He had copies of everything. I called Douglas the same afternoon. When I explained what had happened, he didn't say much at first. He just started pulling up records. And what he found was something I hadn't known to look for. The $60,000 I had given my daughter and her husband hadn't all stayed in their joint account. Douglas showed me the gift letter I'd signed, the wire transfer confirmation, and then through records my daughter had actually shared with me 2 years earlier when she was managing some household paperwork from our shared family account, a pattern I hadn't connected at the time. A separate account had been opened in my son-in-law's name alone shortly after the house purchase. Over the following 16 months, transfers from their joint account into that separate account totaled approximately $23,000. Small amounts, irregular intervals, the kind of movement that doesn't catch your eye unless you're looking for it. I sat in Douglas's office for a long time. I thought about my son-in-law's face at the closing, how relieved he'd seemed, how grateful. I thought about my daughter saying he just likes things to run smoothly. I thought about whether she knew about that account. Sitting there, I decided she probably didn't, which was somehow the worst part. Douglas and Thomas worked together over the next 8 weeks. I didn't say a word to either of them. I kept calling ahead on Saturdays. I kept arriving on time. I parked on the street. I sat in their living room and played Go Fish with Lily and told her about the cedar waxwings that had shown up at my feeder, and she asked me to draw one for her. So I did on the back of a grocery receipt, and she carried it around for the rest of the visit folded up in her pocket. My son-in-law watched me from the doorway most of those Saturdays with his arms crossed, not unfriendly exactly, just monitoring. One afternoon, Lily asked me why I always drove such a long way just to visit. I said because she was worth a long drive. She said, "Daddy says you visit too much." I told her that daddies and grandpas sometimes see things differently and that was okay. She nodded like that was a satisfying answer and went back to her coloring. In the 9th week, Thomas told me we had enough. He had drafted a formal demand letter. It laid out the $60,000 gift, the gift letter, and the subsequent transfer of approximately $23,000 into a separate account, an account my daughter had not been party to, and, based on what we could document, did not appear to know about. The letter formally noted the pattern of restricted grandparent access and cited Texas Family Code Section 153.333, which allows a grandparent to seek court-ordered access to a grandchild when certain conditions are met, and denial of access would significantly impair the child's physical health or emotional well-being. The letter was precise. It wasn't hostile. It simply made clear, in the way that legal documents make things clear, that what had been happening was documented and that we were prepared to let a court look at all of it. Douglas prepared a separate financial summary. Clean, dated, clear. I put both documents in a manila envelope. I called my daughter on a Thursday evening and told her I'd like to come by Saturday as usual. She said that was fine. She said she'd let him know. Saturday morning I drove to Sugar Land. The envelope was on the passenger seat. I listened to a baseball game on the radio for most of the drive, which is what Carol and I always did on long drives. It helped. My son-in-law answered the door. He was in a good mood, or performing one. He said Lily was in the backyard with a bubble wand that I should go on through. I said I needed a minute first. I said I had something for him. He saw the envelope. Something moved across his face. Not quite alarm, but close. I handed it to him. He opened it there in the doorway. He read the first page. I watched his expression change, not to guilt, not right away, but to a kind of suspended confusion. The face of someone who had prepared for one conversation and was now in a completely different one. He turned to the second page, the financial summary. He read it twice. Then he looked up at me. "What is this supposed to be?" I said it was a letter from my attorney and a financial summary from my CPA. I said I thought he'd want to read it carefully, and then I thought he'd want to have a conversation with my daughter. He started to say something. I could see him looking for the angle, the way he always looked for the angle. I said the account is documented. The transfers are documented. All of it. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. I was the quietest I'd been in months. When you sat with something for 8 weeks, when you've made your decision and worked through what it means, there isn't much room left for anger. There's just the thing itself. He said he could explain the account. I said, "I'm sure you can, and my daughter deserves to hear that explanation." He didn't say anything after that. My daughter appeared in the hallway behind him. She'd heard voices. She looked at the papers in his hand, then at me, then at him. Lily came through from the backyard right then, still holding the bubble wand, with a soap bubble caught in her hair that she didn't know was there. She walked up and put her arm around my leg the way small children do, automatic and certain. "Hi, Grandpa Arthur." "Hi, sweetheart." My daughter looked at my son-in-law. He was still holding the papers. His expression was something I hadn't seen on him before. The careful, managed surface had gone somewhere, and underneath it was just a man who had been caught, standing in his own doorway. "Come inside, Dad," my daughter said. Her voice was steady. Whatever she was feeling, she held it level. She was like Carol that way. We sat at their kitchen table. Lily went back to the backyard. My son-in-law tried, at first, to frame the account as something they'd agreed on together. Savings he'd set aside, money management, nothing hidden. My daughter asked him to show her where this account was in their banking app. He couldn't do it fast enough, and the hesitation was its own answer. She didn't raise her voice. She asked questions the way someone does when they already know, and they're just deciding how much they need to hear. She asked how long the account had been open. She asked what the money was for. She asked why she wasn't on it. He ran out of explanations before he ran out of questions. I left after about an hour. I said goodbye to Lily in the backyard, where she was chasing the bubbles she'd made and catching most of them before they popped. She showed me a caterpillar she'd found on the fence post. She said she was going to name it Gerald. I said Gerald was a very good name for a caterpillar. I drove back to Beaumont. I stopped at a Whataburger on the way because I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and I didn't want to sit in my kitchen alone just yet. I ate in the parking lot and listened to the rest of the ball game and thought about Carol. who had strong opinions about Whataburger and would have had something definitive to say about this whole situation from the beginning, probably 6 months before I was ready to hear it. There were a lot of conversations after that, some of which I was part of, most of which I wasn't. My daughter called Thomas directly, not as an adversary, she said, just to understand what options she had. That told me something. 18 months later, my son-in-law moved out. My daughter kept the house. The $60,000 was addressed in the separation agreement. Not all of it recovered, not even close, but acknowledged and partially settled. Thomas told me to let the rest go, that it would cost more in time and stress than it was worth. He was right. Some things cost what they cost, and the calculation isn't always about the money. What I want to say, if you're watching this and recognizing something, is that what happened in my family has a name. It's called financial coercion, and it works the same way in a lot of households. Someone takes something that was given freely and converts it, in their own mind, into leverage. And then they use that leverage to manage access, to set terms, to make the people who love you feel like love has conditions. I'm not a dramatic person. I spent almost 30 years in a classroom teaching 16-year-olds how to read a blueprint and use a table saw without losing a finger. I like things clear and functional. I don't escalate unless I have to. But there is a difference between being patient and being complicit. And it took me too long to understand that the rules I was following weren't protecting anyone, they were just making it easier for someone to keep moving the line. Grandparent rights in Texas are real. They're specific and the threshold is high. You have to show that denial of access would significantly impair the child. But they exist, and they can be enforced. Texas Family Code, Section 153. Look it up. Know it exists before you need it. Money given to family should be documented regardless of how much you trust them, not because you expect things to go wrong, but because documentation protects everyone, including the relationship. A simple signed gift letter, copies kept by both parties and your CPA, is enough. I had that. It made everything that came after possible. And if you are watching someone you love being isolated, a parent being edged out, a grandparent being managed, someone who used to show up freely and now shows up on a schedule with a sign-in sheet, say something to them, gently, without making it a bigger conflict. Because the person being isolated often can't see it clearly. They're inside it. They're following the rules because they've been told. The rules are about love, and it takes time to understand that love doesn't come with a signature line. Last month, Lily lost her second tooth. She called me from my daughter's phone before they'd even cleaned her up. She was talking so fast I could barely understand her, but I got the important parts. It had come out during lunch. She hadn't even noticed until she felt the gap, and she wanted me to know immediately. I drove over that afternoon. My daughter made sweet tea and we sat on the back porch while Lily demonstrated 17 times exactly how she could touch the gap with her tongue. I took a picture of her grinning that wide, crooked grin. I sent it to my daughter. I kept one for myself, and I put a copy in the frame on the windowsill in my kitchen, next to the one of Carol in the recliner with Lily on her chest, both of them small and warm and lit by the winter light coming through the hospital window. Carol would have completely lost her mind about that tooth. She would have called Bev next door and her sister in Oklahoma, and probably some people she hadn't talked to in years. She would have made it a whole thing. I like to think she already knew. I've thought a lot about what made my son-in-law believe he could do what he did, and I don't think it was pure malice, not entirely. I think it was the slow, confident logic of someone who had tested a boundary, found no resistance, and kept going. Every time I followed a new rule without pushing back, every time I drove 40 minutes and parked on the street and kept my mouth shut, I was confirming something for him. That I would absorb it. That compliance was the price of access, and I'd keep paying. That's the part that stayed with me longest. Not what he did, but how long I let it continue, because I mistook silence for peace. There's something I've come to believe about the way people treat you over time. It rarely arrives all at once. It comes in increments, each one small enough to rationalize. The visit gets shorter, the rules get longer, the ask gets bigger. And if you're a person who values calm, who spent 3 decades teaching teenagers to measure twice before they cut anything, who doesn't like conflict and doesn't want to make things harder for the people you love, you absorb each increment because you're focused on the relationship, not the pattern. The pattern is what you have to learn to see. What I did over those 8 weeks, calling Thomas, sitting in Douglas's office, documenting every date and every canceled visit, wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I know how these stories can sound. It was just accurate accounting. It was finally applying the same careful attention to my own situation that I'd spent 30 years teaching kids to apply to a set of blueprints. You read what's actually in front of you. You don't build on a foundation without checking it first. What Carol would have said, and she would have said it earlier and more plainly than I'm saying it now, is that love doesn't come with conditions you have to negotiate. When something is true, you don't need a signature line at the bottom of it. The $60,000 I lost, the partial settlement, the months I sat on a beige couch following rules written by someone who saw a grandfather as a resource to be managed. None of that is recoverable, and I've made peace with that. Some things cost what they cost, and the ledger doesn't always balance the way you want. What did come back was my daughter, and Lily calling me from across town because she lost a tooth and I was the first person she wanted to tell. That's not nothing. That's actually most of it. If there's something worth passing on from any of this, it's simpler than I expected. Document what you give, even to people you completely trust, because documentation protects the relationship, not just the money. Know your rights before you need them, because by the time you need them, the urgency tends to make clear, thinking harder. And don't confuse patience with acceptance. They feel similar from the inside, but they point in completely different directions. I'm not a man who believes things happen for a reason in any tidy, prearranged sense, but I do believe that how you respond to being treated badly is one of the few things you actually get to choose. You can absorb it and call it keeping the peace, or you can be patient, quiet, thorough, and then hand someone an envelope. Lily is still drawing birds. Last week, she asked me what sound a cedar waxwing makes. I told her it's a very high, thin whistle, almost like a question. She practiced it for about 10 minutes, until she got something close. Carol would have loved that. She would have made a whole thing out of it.